homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Today I am making lemon curd. And lemon curd is a really interesting product in that it kind of goes against all of the rules of normal canning. And the recipe that I'm following is from this book called So Easy to Preserve out of the Cooperative Extension, University of Georgia. This is the location of the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And so they are kind of definitive in terms of the recipes in that book, the same way that recipes in the Ball books are definitive. So they've been well tested. It is the only recipe out there for lemon curd that's actually water bath canned rather than just frozen. What I usually do is I water bath can this and then I throw it in the refrigerator anyway, because lemon curd is a combination of butter, lemon juice, and then eggs. And I'm going to be using my beautiful farm fresh eggs in this today. And so normally you never see recipes that call for canning dairy. So this is a very unusual recipe. However, it is very well tested because the National Center for Home Food Preservation out of University of Georgia has done a lot of testing on this. They do have a note in their own recipe that says this will only store 4 to 5 months and that you can also freeze it. There are recipes in several of the Ball books that also have lemon curd recipes that indicate you should just freeze it rather than can it. And so that's another way to go. Like I said, I can it just so that it's been sanitized, sterilized, and then I throw it in the fridge and I use it out of the fridge. Because of all that dairy and the eggs, it does only have a 3 or 4 months shelf life, even canned. So you don't want to keep it for long term. It is absolutely delicious. And my favorite way of using it is just mixed into a little bit of plain yogurt. So I'll do fresh fruit, so chopped apples or pears this time of year, sometimes citrus, sometimes frozen fruit like blueberries, plain yogurt, and then just a scoopful of the lemon curd mixed in with some granola. That is my favorite breakfast this time of year. So that's really my motivation for making this. It's wonderful. So let's get going. So since this is a water bath canning recipe, the first thing you want to do is get your canning pot filled with water and heating on the stove so it's ready to go. A little drop of vinegar, white vinegar, into your pot. If you've got hard water, will keep water deposits from forming on the outside of the jars. And then I like to, if I'm using store-bought citrus, I really like to scrub them well. There's a food-grade wax that's on these that I don't want to be eating, and so I give everything a really good scrub before I start zesting anything. I've had this zester microplane for probably 15 years. I think I bought it from Lee Valley. And it is an awesome tool. I use it all the time. And you're going to want to zest. It calls for a half a cup of lemon zest. I didn't bother measuring it. I just zested 5 lemons. And then to that, you're going to add 2.5 cups of sugar. I actually missed this step and added it after I had juiced the lemon, so ignore the juice in the corner there. The original recipe has you filter and screen out that lemon zest. I chose to leave it in. And then I'm going to need a cup of fresh lemon juice. There's a lot of debate about recipes that call for fresh lemon juice versus bottled lemon juice. The original recipe called for bottled lemon juice. However, there's good evidence that bottled lemon juice is actually standardized to a higher pH than the pH of fresh squeezed lemon juice, and so I felt very comfortable about using fresh squeezed instead of bottled. I hate the taste of bottled lemon juice. It's kind of gross. I always fold my lemons in half. Once I've squished them once, I figure I get another teaspoon or so of juice out of it, and I want all the juice I can get, so I go ahead and do that. We're going to end up with about a cup of fresh lemon juice total here. I now need a total of 7 egg yolks and 4 whole eggs. I caught the edge of this first one on the shell, and so I'm counting this as one of the whole ones. These are gorgeous farm fresh eggs, and I love those bright orange yolks in there. I'm a big fan of using my hands when I have to separate eggs. I know a lot of people find this kind of gross, but I think it is so much easier, and you're so much less likely to actually break the yolk by using your hands rather than passing it back and forth across the edge of that shell. And so I've been using my hands to separate eggs for years. And I'll freeze these egg whites and save them for another project. I usually make an angel food cake with them. Get that all whisked up nicely. And then I chose to actually filter this through a strainer now rather than waiting until the end of the recipe. There were a lot of white, end pieces on those yolks, and I didn't want to have to fiddle with filtering stuff through a strainer later, and so I just went ahead and strained it now. And you can see there's little drabs of stuff in there that didn't quite get broken down from the whisking. Lemon curd is basically the same as lemon meringue pie filling. And so that's basically what we're making here. And then I just poured everything back into my original metal bowl, and I'm going to use that metal bowl as a double boiler. So I've got my heat on quite low, and this is a gas stove, and so one of the tricks with a gas stove is that heat will come up around the edges of that pot, and so you really have to be careful when you're doing this type of double boiler that the edges of your top bowl don't get too hot and cook from the heat running around there. So we add in the sugar, the zest. Now I'm adding in the lemon juice. I like to run this through a strainer. I love this little strainer. I use it all the time. You can see I missed a couple of seeds in there, and it also kind of filters out any chunky pulp. Again, fingers are sometimes your best tool. It was much easier to just use my finger here than it was to go get another spoon. And my heat is on really low right now in this double boiler. I have an inch or two of water at the bottom, so the water is not touching the bottom of the bowl. I'm gonna need 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter. Anybody else annoyed when the butter wrapper doesn't line up with the marks so that you can't find the center? I hate it when I have to take it apart and reposition it. 3/4 of a cup of butter is a stick and a half. And the more you cut it up, the faster it's gonna melt. More surface area. Look how pretty that is. And again, heat is still really low. You want to heat this to 170. You really do need to have a thermometer for this. What you're doing is pasteurizing the eggs. If you get it too hot, you're going to curdle the eggs and you will have basically lemon scrambled eggs. And if it's too low, you haven't pasteurized your eggs. So this is a safety thing. I use kitchen thermometers all the time. It is worth the investment. I did realize later on a different project that this particular thermometer that I'm using is not terribly accurate at high temperatures. So once it's off the heat, once we've reached 170, you want to stir it for about 5 minutes until it thickens. And then you're ready to start putting it into bottles. For whatever reason, I am really short on 8-ounce bottles right now, also called half pint. I don't know why they call them half pint and not just call them 8-ounce bottles or jars. So I've got quite an assortment here of different sizes and shapes. I tend to buy used things like this at estate sales all the time, and so I'm always collecting different canning jars. The recipe for this calls for a 1/2 inch of headspace, and I actually overfilled these. I forgot about that. Usually jams are a 1/4 inch headspace, and so I hadn't read the recipe closely. And so everything is actually slightly more full than it should be on this. I've made this recipe several times, and what happens if you overfill the jar is it tends to boil in the jar and then kind of push out through the seal, and you end up with a mess where it's kind of coming out the jar itself and it doesn't seal well. What I ended up doing because I realized I had overfilled it after I put them in the water bath canner was I essentially pasteurized them rather than boiled them. And so I kept my temperature under boiling. It was over 180, but under 212 in order to sanitize this well, sterilize it well, but I didn't want to bring it to a boil because I didn't want it to leak out the rim. Don't do like I do, just fill it less. This recipe claims to make 3 to 4 half pints, which is basically 4 cups. Every recipe I've ever used from Ball makes more than what it says on the recipe. And so this ended up making about 4.5 cups. That's a 4-ounce jar there at the end. And you can see, especially that jar in the upper left corner is definitely too full. I'm wiping my rims here. This is just a wet paper towel. And then again, as always with water bath canning, finger tight. And so you want to turn that lid until it's just starting to grip. You don't want to really put a lot of pressure around it. What you're trying to do is leave enough room that as that airspace gets hot, it can push out around the edge of that rim. And if it's too tight, you run the risk of breaking the jar. So you want that air to be able to escape. And then as it cools, it will suck back in and seal the jar. A sealed jar is not a sign of a safe jar. You can totally do a canning recipe wrong and have the jar still seal. That is a mistake that a lot of new canners make. And so follow recipes closely. Don't just assume that if your jar sealed, everything in there is safe. And I did end up, the water level on this is just slightly lower than it should be. You want about 1 inch of water above the top of the jars, and I had that one tall jar that wasn't quite enough. So I did end up adding some water to this after I got all the jars into the pot. So this is after it's been canning. The total canning time on this is 15 minutes. And I was a little bit, you can see it's not at a rolling boil, it's just kind of bubbling. And so essentially I pasteurized it. I feel comfortable with this because I am going to refrigerate it when I'm done. This is not gonna be sitting out as shelf-stable jam. If that is not something you're comfortable with, just throw it in the freezer. As I mentioned in the earlier part of this video, Ball has several recipes for lemon curd where you simply freeze it rather than can it. I was taking a little bit of liberty here because I overfilled the jars, fogging up the lens there. It's so pretty. And there you go. 4.5 jars of beautiful lemon curd that we will eat in our yogurt and granola for the next couple of months. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment. We have new videos coming out every week.